Has anyone ever told you, just be yourself, everything will work out? That advice would seem to fit any time, any place, except maybe at work?
Just be you all the time or go girl is something that maybe Kim Kardashian and Kanye West would prescribe. They can afford to do it, but for the rest of us, we just have to manage impressions as well as we can and fake it until we make it.
Yeah, he's saying if you want to get ahead, sometimes your best move is don't be yourself. Hi, welcome to the Cost of Living Halloween edition. I'm Paul Helversrud, or Haversrud. So if you want to dress up as yourself and go trick-or-treating, that's fine. But at work, you might want to wear a mask. At least sort of. Later in the show, we talk to the author of a new book who says bringing your whole self to work could be frightening for your career. Also today, what if the scariest thing about buying a house isn't water in the basement, but an actual ghost? We look at the ins and outs of selling a haunted house. Up first, it's the spookiest question for the economy and blood-curdling for investors. Is artificial intelligence in a bubble? And what happens to us if it pops? Ryan Connell got his first Beanie Baby when he was 13. It was a brown, floppy-eared dog named Bones. But it wasn't his last.
I had a 4-foot orangutan, 2 4-foot other bears, and I had, pillow pals, and even the teeny beanie babies you would get at McDonald's. I have tons of those still in a Rubbermaid container.
Ask any 90s kid and they'll tell you. Beanie Babies were everywhere. At one point, a poll found 64% of Americans owned at least one Beanie Baby. Orion had way more than that. He saw them, like many people did, as an investment. So he got a part-time job at Hallmark, which, not coincidentally, sold Beanie Babies.
Honestly, my paycheck was going to Hallmark at the time to be able to then get whatever the week's release was. And I was, sly enough in the sense that I was right there as an employee who could get the first ones as they were getting released. My mom was livid at the time because she was saying, you're supposed to be saving up for your college education. And I wasn't doing that at all. And so thanks to...
Ryan piled up so many Beanie Babies, the family gave them their own room in the house.
By the time that I had finished collecting and kind of said, you know what, I'm off to college now, and I have to put a kind of a stop on this, my family and I pretty much had amassed about $40,000 worth of Beanie Babies. All the hope was that I was going to afford my university or college education in the future, or that I could get a car out of it.
That didn't happen. The Beanie Baby bubble eventually popped. Just like Dutch tulip mania, the South Sea trading bubble, stocks in the roaring 20s. All of those were inflated by so much hype, the actual value of the underlying assets didn't matter. In a bubble, the thing that really counts is how much something could be worth one day. Artificial intelligence could now be in the mother of all bubbles. The numbers swirling around AI are so big, they're like funny money. By one measure, the dollars going into AI make it 17 times bigger than the dot-com boom. Just one company, Nvidia, is worth more than the combined value of every firm on the UK stock market. The top 10 AI startups have gained $1 trillion in market value in the last year. And none of them have made a dime. All of that may seem pretty frothy. But the funny thing about bubbles, you can't be totally sure you're in one until it pops. And that's part of what now has people so worried. If this is a bubble, could the sheer scale of what's happening with AI put us all at risk? Will Quinn is an economic historian and the co-author of Boom and Bust, A Global History of Financial Bubbles. And he says the past can shed some light on what's happening now.
Our model of what causes a bubble, what we call the bubble triangle, which is similar to the fire triangle in chemistry, where you have a fire starts when you have oxygen, heat, and fuel, and then a spark.
He argues the causes of a bubble can be explained in similar ways. So let's put AI into Will's bubble triangle. The first side is marketability. How easy is an asset to buy and sell? For AI stocks, it's pretty easy. Click a button and bam, you own shares in NVIDIA. The second side is money. AI also has that going for it. Tech companies are sitting on mountains of cash. And AI startups can seemingly raise millions at the snap of a finger. The last side is speculation. The stories investors tell themselves that create hype and momentum.
AI might have more of this than I've ever seen in a historical bubble, even more than the internet. These sort of very futuristic ideas that it's going to usher in a utopia or a dystopia. These sort of really big stories or overarching narratives about how enormous the technology is going to be.
So AI would seem to have all the ingredients needed for a bubble. What comes next is where things get tricky. Look at the dot-com boom. It popped in 2000, but people were warning about a bubble, talking about irrational exuberance for years before that.
People were writing stories saying, the internet is in a bubble. And the response was like, okay, yeah, you've been saying that for 4 years. You just kept being wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong. Why should we listen to what you have to say? And I can absolutely see that happening with AI. I could see maybe the valuations just continue to grow, and people who were saying there was a bubble don't seem very credible anymore. And the people who are saying AI is the future, this time is different, start to get more and more media coverage and more attention and more respect.
The question of are we or aren't we in a bubble can go back and forth for a long time, and we really don't know when anything might pop. But if you want to look at history for some signs, Will says
a bubble tends to burst whenever it runs out of fuel. So whenever the market has run out of new retail investors that it can draw in, or runs out of space to issue more debt to invest in the bubble asset, or whenever policymakers start to tighten interest rates, this tends to be a signal that the bubble is going to burst.
Right now, the money is still pouring in. And the more that gets spent on AI, the bigger the potential bubble, the more people worry about what could happen if it bursts. The head of the IMF just warned a market crash could wipe out $35 trillion in global wealth. She says this would hammer consumer spending and crater economies. It would be much worse than the mild recession that happened after the dot-com bubble. A lot of the money in AI is also now just being handed back and forth between the same companies. You invest in us, we buy your chips, your stock goes up, you invest more in us. AI companies could be artificially inflating a bubble themselves. And so then what happens if investors wake up one day and decide the AI revolution, the massive productivity gains that have been promised, won't materialize as hoped? What Will Quinn is watching is the banking system. If a bubble pops, could we get the same kind of contagion that happened during the 2008 financial crisis?
If the AI market crashes, is it going to bring down a major bank? It shouldn't, unless that there's something going on at these banks that we don't know about. It's this unraveling effect when it's driven by borrowed money that causes the major economic damage. So, you get a wave of defaults or a wave of company failures that then bring down other companies. And then this reaches the banks because banks have their fingers in every single part of the economy. So whenever a bank fails, everyone is in trouble.
He says when tech bubbles burst, historically, it hasn't been as bad for the economy as something like a housing crash. Investors losing money on tech stocks isn't great, but the fallout is also more contained than, say, people losing their homes. But the stock market is only one part of the AI bubble. Money is also being poured into data centers. One estimate says the money that could be spent on data centers globally in the next 5 years could be up to $7 trillion. Even if the companies spending that money go bankrupt, those data centers will still exist. And this could be a silver lining. Like the fiber optic cable that got laid during the dot-com boom. The companies behind it may have gone broke, but all of us, we got fast internet.
Some bubbles can be useful. They're not optimal or efficient, but they can have useful effects. I've seen it argued that without bubbles, technology would be underfunded. If people are investing completely rationally all the time, they'll just never throw their money at something with such an uncertain return, and a return that's expected to be well into the future.
Ryan Connell, who threw all the money he made as a teenager into Beanie Babies, knows that, yeah, sometimes investments aren't completely rational.
I will tell you, I live in a one-bedroom apartment now and still have 7 Rubbermaid containers full of Beanie Babies.
He keeps them stacked in his hallway closet. You can do that with 7 Rubbermaid containers. $7 trillion worth of data centers, that could be a bit tougher to tuck away in a closet. This is an eerie Halloween edition of The Cost of Living. I'm Paul Havershood. The most frightening financial decision of someone's life could be buying a house. The nightmare scenario is when the shower curtain gets pulled back and you find mold in the walls. Then again, sometimes the nightmare scenario really is a nightmare. Our producer Danielle Nerman, in a story we first aired a few years ago and are now raising from the dead, looks at how to sell a haunted house.
Tanis Spark says it all began in her bedroom. Every night she would shut her blinds. Then,
every morning, I was like, they are open. Like, how much did I have to drink last night?
lights would mysteriously turn on by themselves. House keys would go missing. Her roommate, Susan Noring, found a long trail of dusty footprints on the floor. It got so bad, Susan didn't want to be alone in the house.
And so I brought my most skeptical and toughest friends to stay with me for a few days at a time. And every single one of them left going, holy crap, there's something creepy going on here.
Susan and Tanis were convinced they were living with a ghost. Okay, maybe you don't believe in ghosts, but nearly half of Canadians do, according to a recent Ipsos survey. And Barry Lebo, he's met a lot of believers. He's been a real estate agent in Ontario for 55 years.
You could walk into a house and say, nice house. And I'll walk in and go, I wouldn't stay 2 minutes in this house. We feel it differently. We interpret it differently. You're receiving on AM, I'm receiving on FM. It's that simple.
Barry teaches a course called Selling the Haunted House. Ooh! It's about what sellers do and don't have to disclose.
You won't see the word haunted in an MLS listing.
Paranormal activity is not something you have to mention to potential buyers. In fact, unless you're in Quebec, you don't have to say anything about bad stuff that happened in the house.
Or even in a natural death. Uncle Fred could have fallen down, or Aunt Frida could have fallen down into the bathtub and killed themselves, or they could have fallen down the stairs. I mean, there's other factors. We do not have to disclose that.
Sellers do have to disclose problems they know about, like a basement that floods every time it rains. That's known as a physical defect, and buyers can be compensated if they only learn about it after the sale. But you cannot blame your buyer's remorse on a ghost.
Unless you can prove that a haunting diminishes the value, there is no loss in value. So that's got no impact. Our judges in Canada do not deal with psychological issues like that with real estate.
Now, if you're wondering why that large Victorian mansion is selling below market price, and you think it might be haunted, you can search the online database House Creep. It lists thousands of properties with checkered pasts. You can also talk to neighbors. Ask them if anything fishy has ever happened in or around the house. Barry Lebo says this is where real estate agents earn their money.
When you find out your client isn't comfortable with an unnatural death, which would be a haunting, right? You would actually put it in an offer. No unnatural death has ever occurred in this property. This is just to the best of their knowledge.
But what if you're living in a place and the ghost shows up after you move in? Sometimes you need to call in a higher power. Susan and Tanis asked a priest to come to their home, and he had a very nice conversation with their ghost, sprinkled some holy water, and then...
Crazily, there was this gust of air inside of the house that just moved like wind through the windows, opened Tanis's windows wide open, and the curtains flapped around. This air just whooshed out of the house. And after that, that was the last thing we ever experienced.
They lived in the house for another year and a half. And now, their advice to others who might be thinking about moving into a haunted house?
Yeah, I'd be a lot more afraid of living in a house with water damage than a ghost.
Touché.
For The Cost of Living, I'm Danielle Nerman.
Happy Halloween from The Cost of Living. I'm Paul Havershood. Let's class this joint up a bit, shall we? One of Shakespeare's most famous pieces of wisdom is in Hamlet. To thine own self be true. Updating that for today, the bard might say, let your freak flag fly. Embrace your true self. Be authentic, wherever you are, even at work. But Thomas Chamorro Premusic? He doesn't think that's such a great idea. He's a workplace psychologist and the author of a new book, Don't Be Yourself: Why Authenticity is Overrated and What to Do Instead. Hello.
Hi, pleasure to be here. How are you?
Well, thanks. So, Tomas, the title of your book, Don't Be Yourself. I think when people read that, it might kind of feel like a smack in their face because, I think people want to be ourselves. We want to dance like nobody is watching. How heretical is it? Are the things that you're saying?
Well, I'd like to say that there are some areas in sort of mainstream management thinking or even psychology where the rational view has become controversial and heretic, but only because the mainstream view is absurd. And authenticity is one of them. It feels good to think or feel that you're just being yourself, of course, because then you don't have any pressures to adjust your behavior, to conform to a situation. But if you see things from other people's perspective, usually when you do that, then you actually downgrade or degrade your ability to connect with others, to relate, and to collaborate, especially in professional settings.
And yet this idea that we need to be authentic, we need to be our authentic selves all the time, whether in our personal lives or in our work lives, I think it's fairly accepted. I mean, can we start with how it got to be that way?
I think it just got hijacked by the narcissistic culture in which we're living. Probably you could pinpoint it to the West Coast of the United States, LA or something like that. Just be you all the time or go girl is something that maybe Kim Kardashian and Kanye West would prescribe. The only people who can afford to just be themselves and disregard what others think of them at work are the privileged elite who got to the top, and unfortunately, they don't care anymore about what other people think of them. But for the rest of us, we just have to manage impressions as well as we can and fake it until we make it.
Okay, well, what about the rest of us then? If the rest of us who aren't sort of that privileged elite do be our authentic selves at work, we bring our whole selves to work, how can that go for us?
The rest of us understand that at some point, the right to be ourselves ends and our obligation to others begins. It is actually quite important and pro-social to care about other people's feelings. And by the way, that is a sign of emotional maturity not to share your unfiltered thoughts or unsolicited opinions about the Middle East, Russia, climate change, whether Canada should be annexed by the US or not, with others. The rest of us understand that if we want to be part of a collective and collaborate with others effectively, it helps to question your own values, our own values, and understand other people's point of views.
Well, can you give an example of how sort of trying to just be our own unfiltered selves while we're in the workplace could go poorly for someone?
Of course. Let me talk about myself. So I have, spent some time not just studying this issue, but also managing people. My whole real or unfiltered, if you like, authentic self includes irritable me. So if you come and tell me something that annoys me, I can, kind of have a tantrum, shout at you, or be really upset. It includes righteous me, which is a version of me that thinks I'm always right and the others are always wrong. And it includes attention-seeking me. So when I'm in a meeting, I have a tendency to talk and talk and talk and not listen to others because I think my ideas are more innovative and creative. Would you advise me then that I should bring my whole self to work, or should I try to edit myself to be a better leader?
Yeah, I think maybe a touch of editing might be good there.
A touch is good. But actually, nuance is important here because what others want to see is not an overly edited version of you. If people think they're dealing with a fraud or a phony, or you're so blatantly sucking up to others and telling them what they want to hear, that you appear to be a politician. If you do that, you have no credibility, other people won't trust you, and nobody will care about you. But other people don't care so much about whether they are interacting with a real or a slightly distorted version of yourself. What they care about is whether their interactions with you actually give them value and help them be a better colleague or a better worker or a better employee.
Okay, so if I'm an employee, then what version of myself, what part of myself do I bring forward?
The best you can. It's in a way no different from like when you go to a job interview. I would say if anybody goes to a job interview thinking that they should just be themselves, they should prepare for being not just unemployed, but also unemployable. People like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk and many famous successful entrepreneurs had one thing in common. They were dispositionally unemployable because they were incapable of adjusting their behavior to fit norms of the situation. And of course, people might think, okay, but they were so successful. Yeah, they had the talents and the drive and the ethic to back it up. Unfortunately, they're in the 0.01% of the population. So I think be yourself, but in a good day, or be yourself in the sense of the version of yourself that you or perhaps your parents, grandparents would be proud of.
I don't want to get into like some sort of generational divide here, and just because I'm older and there might be younger people listening, but is your book kind of directed at younger workers entering the workplace who have sort of been more steeped in a culture of, I am going to dance like no one is watching?
Yes and no. So in a way, it's easy to make those generalizations. And I tell the story in the book of one of my employees who showed up for his performance review wearing a T-shirt that said, "Just be you, they will adjust." And, I couldn't control my authentic self and decided to give him feedback. And I said, either you're the only person who wears this T-shirt and then you're a narcissist, or you think we should all wear that T-shirt and then we're living in an anarchic society. So yeah, it's easy to kind of see that maybe this behavior is more common or prominent or frequent in younger generations, which, by the way, I define as anybody younger than me. But at the same time, I think I'm directing it more at people who misguide and mislead, not just younger workers, but workers in general, because there is this narcissistic zeitgeist among or within the self-help industry that has been perpetuating this cult of the ego, this kind of a worshiping or celebration of our unfiltered or uncensored self.
In your book, you end by saying, look, if you want a model for this, if you want to think about someone who's done this well, I have someone for you. David Bowie I mean, why is Bowie
Yeah.
a good example of how we might want to be in the workplace?
I quote Bowie because I'm a Bowie fan, but for the listeners here that aren't aware of him and his artistic kind of creativity and legacy, Bowie was famous for not just jumping from one genre to another and experimenting with pop, rock, funk, soul, and so on, even electronic music, but also creating or inventing a new artistic persona every time he released a new album with a new genre or style. And so there's this anecdote that I evoke or, kind of recap in the book where a journalist once asked him, but who are you really? And his answer was, I am only the person the largest number of people think I am. And it's a beautiful reminder that even if we wanted to understand who we truly are and be true to ourselves, as Polonius and Shakespeare said, the best way to really understand who we really are is to internalize all of the working models of our character, personality, and reputation that the people who know us have. In other words, we are the total sum of what everybody who knows us thinks we are. Our reputation is scattered around in the eyes of others, and it's quite healthy to try to incorporate or internalize that. So, it's not a bad thing to pretend to be someone better than we actually are and then sustain it consistently and consistently and consistently. It might require a lot of mental effort, but that's basically how you achieve higher levels of success and how you can also build and maintain happier relationships, not just at work, but also in your personal life.
Well, Tomas, I will spend the rest of the day, trying to pretend to be my very best self. Thanks for all of that.
Thank you.
Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic is the author of Don't Be Yourself, Why Authenticity is Overrated, and What to Do Instead. That's all for the show. The Cost of Living is based in Calgary. The show was produced this week by Danielle Nerman Bates Motel, Leah Heldry, and Jennifer Keen, with help from Jeff Kynock and Liam I Ain't Afraid of No Ghosts, duh. Oh, and if you're brave enough, but only if you dare, please throw us a rating, a review. Don't be scared. Nothing bad will happen to you. 5 stars. I'm Paul Haberstrood. Happy Halloween. Thanks for listening.